So I'm sitting here. Here's where like presence and nowness goes, mindfulness goes in. I'm sitting here thinking. I remember just realized as you all were talking, I never pressed record on the recorder.
Oh. Can we start over, please?
Yeah, let's start over.
Wisdom lost.
So much good stuff and it's gone. But okay. All those jokes, yeah. So yeah, we'll just, obviously we're picking up right now. We've been talking about community and accountability, how that we have to establish everything within a community that we have spent enough time with and allowed ourselves to be open and vulnerable enough that we actually are seen by each other. So for those of you who are just picking up the recording right now, that's as much as you're going to get. Go ahead, Bill.
You know, the word accountability, I chafe at it because my experience has been so much being around people who have maybe abused it. And this may be my part of my personality that's pliable enough where I really highly value groups where I'm not going into being given advice. You know, it's kind of a basic ground rule of being in a group. If I see things in other people and I see that they love me or they have an interest in me, I'm feeling more safe at being vulnerable. But the accountability to me sometimes gets, it's almost like it's been used by so many people in my experience to impose what they think I should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that for me is a real legal, to me, when that word comes out, that's when I start feeling legalism. And so I look at it more as I need to invest in people who have a mutual interest in investing with each other. And that process is about getting to know each other, good and bad, and where I feel safe at being in a group that I'm not going to be, shoehorned into a direction one way or the other. Mm-hmm. So, we've talked about it's important for us to ask our own questions and not just kind of identify whether I like what this group is saying or not. And if I like what they're saying enough, then I'm just going to check the box and that's what my brain's going to be thinking all the time, as opposed to stepping back and saying, I need my own experience, as opposed to embracing this franchise of a brand.
Mm-hmm.
Can I say something to that?
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. I hate that word, actually. But I think that we get to choose whatever word we need. And for me,
Choose what?
whatever word you need.
Yeah, right.
And then expect that, give that. And for me, the word, and not to get too spiritual, and it would be cool to have a word that I could share with people who are not necessarily believers, but is glory. Mm-hmm. Because each one of us has been given an incredible glory that's unique. And if you can walk with the group and they know you well or getting to know you, then they just contribute to how amazing you are. And you check yourself and wow, that thing I did yesterday and that whole business thing or whatever, you can check where you're off and make your own adjustments. But when people are encouraging you in a very vulnerable way, places that are amazing or whatever, then they see how you're made and it's amazing. And then the accountability part is kind of personal. It's inside. It's what you do when you need to take care of yourself. But everybody calls out the greatness in you. They call out how amazing that was. And it's not just a pump up group, because you were talking about connection, and real connectivity is vulnerable in places we necessarily wouldn't share all the time, but with a few people you would. And to me, that's the word I use. But I think we should all have a word that works, because that one has been traditionally, So anyway, that's just my thoughts.
There are times that we really do need to be corrected and to be accountable. And there's times that if you grew up in an environment where the word accountability was a euphemism for discipline or control, obviously you've got some redefining to do, but call it whatever you want. There are times when other people are going to see us going into the ditch before we do. That's what accountability is all about. And if it's been done negatively, then you're going to have a chip on your shoulder, you're going to have an aversion to the word. But we need that. We need someone who can say, hey, you're headed for a wreck here. Now what we do with that information is ourselves. And yes, it does need to be balanced with also the positive, the encouragement. And if it's not, well, that's not going to be a good relationship. Most likely, the relationships that you learned to hate the word accountability in, there was a mismatch of power. It was someone in a power position on you. We're talking about relationships that are peer relationships, where we voluntarily give people the ability, the permission to speak into our lives. And that's a whole different setup. But it still may have an emotional, you may have an emotional reaction to it. That's part of this process, is to become aware of that and to be stepping aside from that as well, to clear those decks emotionally so that you can enter into a relationship like this clear and clean. Yeah?
Yeah, well, I heard that word accountability probably in a little bit more of a gentle way. Like, for example, if you're about to go on a diet, the more people you tell you're going to be on the diet, the better chances you are of succeeding on the diet. Because you're kind of, without anybody really calling you on it, just the fact that they know that you've made this commitment helps to keep you accountable.
Keeps you away from the donut bar over there.
Well, not me. Maybe. And it's kind of like the same thing like with a marriage. The reason there's this public declaration and exchange of rings and so on is that it helps to keep you, it's supposed to help to keep you accountable to the marriage in some way. And I heard it more in that vein than in the people yelling at me, wagging their finger at me kind of thing.
Gotcha.
There's kind of a joke that with the guys that work up in Utah, I could go out for a beer with one of them, and they'd have a beer with me. But if there was another Mormon there, they wouldn't have a beer.
Yeah.
And to me, it was kind of like, or I was out for dinner with a bunch of guys when I first started coming to California, and there was a surfer dude that was kind of the hippie type, and it was during Lent, and he wasn't drinking, right, for Lent. And his buddy said, he was kind of like you, his buddy said, who's going to know? And he's like,
accountability partner.
Yeah, it's just accountability. I mean, it's like he wasn't, snowing God. He knew he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was kind of cool. And he was the last person I would have expected that from. But that's, I don't know. That's. I think what I realized for us, for myself, we've moved around so much that it takes time to develop this. It almost always takes, a good year and a half before you kind of look at each other and you realize, this is a family that we're in. And so when you're moving around like that, I realized I was going to be toast if I didn't get tougher on myself, by myself, and have this gal as my accountability, as ticked as she makes me get sometimes. Right? but I made a choice to have her be my accountability partner because I had to. We were moving around so much. I didn't necessarily have people around us to do that. Mm-hmm. So some people can't do that. It's caused a lot of fireworks for us or for me. But that was an accountability decision I made a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. And of course, our goal is to become people who can do this. I mean, that's the whole purpose. If you can't do this, it's because you are so unhealed from your past hurts and traumas that you are not willing to allow yourself to be in real relationship. And to stay in that defensive crouch is to remain separated, which is the definition of sin. Where we're going with all this is the unity, is the connection. That's why we're here. And so confronting these things, like we confronted what makes us, offends us, to become unoffendable, to become comfortable with letting people see who you really are. That's the goal of all this. If you want to be free, if we said that freedom is the ultimate goal of any spiritual program or formation, then free from what? Well, free from the fear of not letting people see who you are. I mean, that is the most exhausting place to be, isn't it? To be constantly worried about what people think, constantly trying to keep the front up, constantly trying to keep yourself positioned so that you can get what you think you need and to fend off, the attacks. I mean, that's exhausting. And it's depressing and all the other things that are dysfunctional in our lives. So we want to get to the place where we can actually be free enough to do that. Yes, we need a safe place to practice. Ultimately, though, we should be able to take this freedom even into a hostile environment and still let the chips fall where they may by being exactly who we are. And if people don't like us, then they don't like us. And that is something that we can handle as well. Ultimately, if we're free enough. If you take a look at Jesus' life, he was unafraid to go in and be exactly himself. He was unafraid to say that thing that would cause half of his followers to leave him or more. He was unafraid to do that. He was able to let the chips fall where they would. Not that it didn't hurt. I'm sure it hurt, to have people leave him or to say what they said about him. But he was still free enough to be able to do that. That's our model. That's what it looks like, in the most extreme form. This is our goal, though. And so we need to practice this, which means you have to risk something. We're going to have to risk getting hurt. We're going to have to risk these things in order to find out who is trustworthy, who is not, and to have the practice of realizing I'm still myself. I'm still okay, even if I have this disapproval on the other side. This is all part of this process. Being aware, being present, making conscious choices, intentional choices to go down this road. Yeah? Well, you can say something? Okay. And ultimately, to see God in each other. We are God's hands and feet. As we move into community, this power greater than ourselves starts right here with this ring of faces that we're looking at right now. I mean, this is a power greater than ourselves. This is something that we can submit to. And submission is huge. This is all about humility, vulnerability, to be able to submit, which doesn't mean to be a doormat. It doesn't mean that you'll never get what you want. And the irony is, the only way you will get ultimately what you want is to be able to submit, which literally means to have more regard for the well-being of the other than you do for yourself. Isn't that what submission really is, ultimately? How do husbands and wives submit to each other? It doesn't mean that one becomes dominant and the other submissive. It means that both of them have a higher regard for the well-being of the other, which means they will do these things that from the outside may look like submission. But if we're not willing to do that, we will never learn how God, in this weirdest of ways, is submitting to us. That's what the foot washing lesson is all about, that he has a higher regard for our well-being than he does for his own. And we will never know that that's possible until we actually see it leaving our bodies in the direction of the other. That's how we prove it to ourselves, yeah?
Sorry, I may be talking too much. To me, I've felt like if I want to have a quality relationship, I need to invest in that relationship. I need to invest my time, my energy. And the word submit to me just feels different. A friendship doesn't deepen unless there's a sharing of mutual weakness, for example. And without that, you're just kind of playing a shell game. And so but to me, that's I guess it's submitting. It just feels different when I say I'm investing in this relationship, because my investing means I'm going to be transparent with that person, that friend, that I have a desire and I feel safe and loved and a desire to love that person back. That's when it deepens. But the submit word, again, is like a negative word to me.
It is for most of us.
Because it's well, which there's a lot of churches that say, if you're part of this body, you got to submit to this church. Well, when you go around, after we moved around, we went to like 3, 4, 5 churches, by moving. I'm like, well, which one am I supposed to submit to? And I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't fit for me.
But see, just like accountability can be a euphemism for discipline, submission can be a euphemism for obedience, and that's really not what we're talking about. When the church or someone in authority, again, here's that differential in power, uses submission, they mean obey me. Do what I tell you to do. And do it without question, and do it with a smile on your face. But that's not really what we're talking about. To have a higher regard for the other can be as simple as going to the movie they want to go to. Right, honey? It can be that it can be that simple.
Depends upon the movie.
Or it can be as huge as deferring your own deeply held career track when you go to college or when you don't, or school or everything, so that the family can have you where they need you for a period. I mean, it's like that. But and even though it may be a difficult choice for you, it's your regard for the greater good that drives the submission. It's not just obedience. It comes from the inside out again and not from the outside in. Yeah, Jim.
The word submit, for me, in the context of relationship, it feels like an unfinished sentence. Example would be with Judy. When I'm submitting to her, I'm willing to make myself vulnerable. I'm submitting to vulnerability. So it gives it context for me. You know, submit is like just too big of a word, too general of a word. But when I define it like that, I can buy into that.
Well, how do you define submission? You're going to define it in the moment where a decision, a choice is required. That's how you're going to define it. Like I said, it can be huge or it can be small, and it can manifest in so many different ways. But the overarching idea is that you have this regard for the greater good. You have the regard for the other that is allowing you to, what, defer your own joy, pleasure, agenda?
I think it implies surrender.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
There you go. That's another great word.
Maybe
Compromise.
It sounds like a perfect expression of love.
It is. It absolutely is.
Bottom line.
Yeah. Which is going to include vulnerability, surrender, sacrifice at times. It's going to include all those things. But it's not a hard line. You know, you don't just write it on the wall and that's what... It's going to look different in different situations. And what will be required, what level required, will be different in different situations.
And I certainly wouldn't want it, the trap, I think, for women, I think, or maybe others too, is that you can use that as a way of hiding, I think. You know, not being willing to be vulnerable, to share your truth, to share your difference, you know, and if you've bought into the religious thing, that would look like silent and sometimes belligerent obedience. And you know, that is not, in my mind, part of the healthy piece of submission, which does have overtones of surrender, I think, and vulnerability, and really weighing, and it's situational. You know, like, okay, what is needed here? Is my need in this particular situation outweigh other choices, or is it more important that I bite the bullet, sacrifice what I want to do, big or little, you know, but really, you know, kind of take the greater good and the well-being of the family or the marriage or whatever into consideration.
This is such an important conversation. There is such a fine line between submission and codependence, right? I mean, how do you determine between the two? This is where it's so. That's why you can't just have a hard and fast rule that's on the wall someplace that you just follow. You know, just some sort of mathematical formula, and this will get you there. You need to bring your whole attention. You need to bring your whole presence to every situation so that you will know the difference. This is what the contemplative life is all about. That's why I said it's not going to necessarily feel spiritual to you. You know, to be able to discern between submission and codependence in a moment and make a choice, that's a prayer. You got to see how that's a prayer. You got to see how this is spiritual. Ultimately, it's all spiritual. But if we don't have the principles or the tools to work with, if we don't have some of these concepts at least sort of worked out, yeah, we can be all over the map with this. We could be sacrificing, quote unquote, unnecessarily and becoming the doormat, because really we're just meeting our own needs. It's not about a higher regard for the other. What we're doing is really what we think we have to do in order to meet our own needs, which is a definition of codependency. But when it's really flowing the other way, it's different. You will know when to stand firm and say no, and you will know when not to, because it really is for the greater good, and you will see the difference in the moment, even if it's a difficult choice. And so this is what this whole way of life is driving us toward. It's that kind of presence, awareness, mindfulness, discernment, to be able to make that choice in real time for the good of everyone who is going to be in your blast zone at the moment. That's what we're after, is getting to that point. If anything that Jesus' life tells us, it's how you do that, how you make those choices. You know, I love the story of Jesus when his friends come to tell him that his friend Lazarus is so sick that he's about to die. Remember that story? He's out with his entourage, and they're ministering in a certain place, and the friends come and say, your cousin Lazarus is about to die. And what does he do? He stays 3 more days in that place. All right? Well, that sounds really callous. He didn't submit to the needs of his family. You know, what was he doing? And then when he finally does mosey on over to Bethany, you know, he's met at the edge of the village by Mary, who's just hysterical. Lord, if you had been here, you know, my brother wouldn't have died. And what does he do? He weeps with her, even as he's going to take a few more steps and raise him from the tomb. How in the world how do you even explain that kind of behavior? You know? And all I can tell you is, again, Jesus is going to be this model at the extremes. But what you have is a picture of a man who is so deeply involved in this moment, the face that is right in front of him, and making his choices based on that everything is going to be okay. Did he have the foreknowledge that he was going to raise him anyway, therefore? Well, that's sort of cheating. You know, that's sort of, you know, giving him powers that take him out of the realm of the human, and the scriptures tell us he was human. I don't personally believe that Jesus had those powers of foreknowledge. What he had was absolute trust in his Father. The absolute trust to say, whether I stay or whether I go at this moment, it's going to work out fine. It's going to be okay because I know who my Father is. His time in the desert, his time in the wilderness, gave him that view of his Father's face that never left him, that he brought like his pressure suit wherever he went into every situation, so that when he was with those people and someone was yammering at him to go someplace else, he stayed there and met the needs that were right in front of him and made those choices based on that. And when he left and he was standing in front of Mary, he weeps with her and mourns with her with his whole heart, because that was the choice that he needed to make for her good. And then when he gets to the tomb, he does what he does there. But at each stage, he's making the choices based on this complete trust that everything is going to be okay. That these details matter less than my willingness to be completely present and vulnerable and open at every moment. That's what this journey is going to give us. And that's what we're after. But it's not going to be a formula. There's not going to be a 1 + 1 = 2 or 3 + 4 = salvation. It doesn't work that way. You bring your whole heart, your whole attention, and your whole decision-making apparatus to every moment, and you do the best you can. And when it doesn't work out the way that you intended, you bring your whole heart, attention, and decision-making apparatus to the next moment, and you do it again. If you can do that, then, how did Rudyard Kipling put it? You're a man, my friend. You're a woman, my friend. All right. That's it. That's all we got time for. This is going to be a short recording. Guy, I'm going to go through all the process of bringing all this gear and setting it up, and I don't press record. What can you do? Okay, so we have one more class on this, then we'll take the week break, and then we'll start with meditation. So we're going to need to finish up this all next session. So bring your thinking caps with you. All right.
Session next time.
But for now,
Bring your
go get
jammies.
some food. Let's eat.